What's going on, people? It's your boy back with another reaction video. I'll be reacting to 3 true creepy stalker stories from subscribers. This is from channel Unit 522. I'm trying to rapid fire some because I planned on doing these like a Christmas thing, and I think this came up when I planned it. This was one of the new ones. I think he uploaded this back in November, I want to say. But that didn't happen. If you notice, I haven't reacted to any every day uploading a narration of horror stories. But we'll have to see because it's late, and I'm getting tired. But we'll see if I can get through all of them. I got quite a few. At least I get them and then edit them tomorrow or something. But anyway, let's get into this. Right here we go. I feel like I've seen
To start things off, I'm a 26-year-old female, and I'm also quite petite, which makes me appear a lot younger than I really am. I am a New Hampshire resident, and I live a rather short distance away from a state hospital known as
26?
Concord. I used to work in the Steeplegate Mall, which unfortunately has been dying due to the lack of foot traffic, so naturally many stores ended up shutting down. Because of that, the mall has become more of a dead zone by the day, making it a hotspot for shady people. There have been many times where I've cashed out people who were clearly under the influence of heavy drugs. I'm not sure if it was heroin or whatever, but you could just tell by looking at these people and trying to communicate with them that they just weren't all there. Some of these customers would even walk in bleeding without even knowing it.
Bleeding from the asshole?
Now that you understand the details, let's get into the story.
Gross.
One night, me and my friend, who I'll refer to as Tony, decided to take an Uber into town. I was feeling a bit down over some drama that was happening in my personal life, so Tony wanted to cheer me up and get me out of the house for a bit.
Oh, Tony,
We were having a great
good
time
friend.
going into the stores and getting in our exercise. The mall would be closing soon, so we decided to take advantage of my discount and grab something to eat. We exited the mall, and it was about 8 p.m., so it was pretty dark outside. The parking lot was mostly empty aside from a few cars. We were making our way to the art store when we suddenly saw a white car drop someone off. This person appeared to be male, but we couldn't quite see his face, and he soon disappeared into the bushes. Tony was keeping an eye on the man, while I was watching the driver peel out of the parking lot. We both thought that was the end of the white car, but less than a minute later, the car came back, attempting to get closer to us. He would peel out on the pavement, getting more and more aggressive the closer he got. Tony and I were both beyond scared by this point. It felt as if my heart was about to pop out of my throat, and Tony looked like she was in utter shock or disbelief. I quickly started looking around for a place that we could possibly hide, and I saw the back door to a Bon-Ton that went out of business, and suggested to Tony that we should make a break for that door. Our legs were sore from all the walking we had done that day, but the primal fear that we were both feeling propelled us forward, and we booked it through the back door, figuring that it would at least buy us some time, and we could call for help. However, we entered a small room that had another door that led into the main area, and that door was locked, preventing us from going any further. We pulled out our phones, and my heart sank once I realized that my phone was dead, and Tony's phone was glitching so bad that it was unusable. She was struggling with her phone, and we both heard the car slowly drive by the door. I immediately felt my stomach drop, and I thought that this was the end, This psychopath was going to kidnap me and my friend, and this is how we would die. Luckily, the driver lost interest and drove off. It took a lot of courage for us just to open the door and leave. After multiple attempts of restarting her phone, Tony was finally able to get it to work. She then called up an Uber to drive us home. The next day, I brought this up to my boss, and she told me there had been a lot of suspicious people coming through that end of the mall, where a charter school was located. Apparently, some sketchy individuals have been spying on children, and that mall security would be patrolling that area more thoroughly. Tony and I
She
are
did
now
say she was
convinced that this
petite,
person
so
may have
she
thought
looked
we were
younger than
kids
she
that
is.
attended the school. In early September, the store that I worked at ended up closing. And not even a month after I stopped working there was a shooting in the mall parking lot. It was ruled as a murder-suicide. A woman was shot by her boyfriend, and then he turned the gun on himself. He was found dead on the scene, and the woman was taken to the hospital, where she later succumbed to her injuries. After being harassed in the parking lot that night, and now hearing about the shooting, let's just say that Tony and I will be staying far away from that area from now on. Clearly, it's not a very safe place to be. We both learned a valuable lesson that night. Never walk through a parking lot in spots where most people can't see you, especially at night. And always make sure your phone is charged, because you never know when you might need it.
I remember the Westfield Mall. I think it was on St. Charles Rock Road.
This happened about 5 or 6 years ago.
And
I was in my
there was a shooting
mid-20s,
there. There's always
and I lived in a small
thugs and shit,
town
and
with
they ended up
access to a
closing it
lake,
down.
which made it a popular spot for tourists from the northern suburbs of Chicago. It was early in the fall, so tourist season was winding down, and things were starting to return to a more quiet, if not somewhat boring pace. I was off of work that day, and I decided to get out and enjoy some fresh air. For me, this often meant sitting on a park bench and watching the lake and all of its comings and goings for a while, before getting up to walk down the lakefront and
What
over
lake
to the
was
beach
that? Lake
house.
Michigan?
I slowly wandered across the park and over to this old wooden bench that went over a creek that fed into the lake. This led to a small sidewalk that extended to a side access road.
That can't be Lake
People
Michigan.
like to set up lawn chairs and sit in the grass in this area. There was also this large tree that had to have been there for a century or more that served as a natural rally
Definitely not.
point. I was approaching
Unless
that
she had a
tree
different part of
when I
Lake
stopped to
Michigan,
take in the view.
like further north.
It was at this point that I realized that I had left my phone at home. There were no chairs up that day, and I was the only one on the sidewalk. Traffic on the main road had been pretty light, and there was only one car parked on the access road. It was a perfect day, but as I stood there, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car slowly pulling up behind me. I didn't think anything of it at first. I was fully expecting the vehicle to pass me and pull up into one of the parking spots. However, it didn't. My next thought was that my dad may have come down to see what I was up to. He also liked to hang out at the same park like I did, but when I didn't hear the familiar greeting, I started to pay closer attention. I always look like I'm totally lost in thought when I'm out there, but I actually do keep a pretty good eye on my surroundings, and the idling vehicle behind me was putting me on edge. Once in a while, people stop at odd spots to snap pictures of the lake, but I got the feeling that it wasn't the lake that was being watched. It was me. I peered over my shoulder and saw a red Ford Windstar minivan sitting there. The windows were tinted, but I can make out that there was a man sitting in the driver's seat, and he was looking right at me. But the one thing that got me the most was the sight of the front license plate. It read, and I kid you not, Skinner. I gave this van a good once-over to let the driver know that I saw him. I also did my best to make my posture seem like I wasn't nervous, that I was alert. I decided to move a bit further down the sidewalk, like I wasn't unsettled by Mr. Skinner and his minivan. I stopped again when I heard the sound of his tires rolling over the pavement. He was following me, doing his best to keep at about 10 feet away. I started going over what if scenarios in my head.
You're not being
I could see a creep
conspicuous.
wanting to hang around and stalk me if I was a attractive woman or something.
Especially if y'all the
But
only
I'm a
two there.
fat guy of average height,
Oh,
so I never considered that I would be the target of an
he said
abduction.
I'm a fat guy.
I glanced around again, and I saw no one else walking down the sidewalk.
Maybe he likes men.
It was just me and the van. I decided to walk off the concrete and into the grass, like I was going to stand by the water. I made my way around that big tree and stood out of sight. I started listening for the van doors, but all I heard was the sound of the engine idling. The driver wasn't getting out, but he wasn't leaving either. I began wondering how long he would sit there and wait, so I stayed out of sight for a good 10 minutes, hoping that he would get bored. Finally, I saw a figure coming from the direction of the beach. It was an old man, maybe in his late 70s. I reached into my pocket where I kept a knife. I figured this old guy was going to be my ticket to break this waiting game with Mr. Skinner. He was either going to make his move, in which case I would be ready, or he was going to bug out because we weren't alone anymore. As the old man got closer, I could tell that he was eyeing me and the minivan. I came out from around the tree and back into Skinner's view and began walking toward the old man. My hand was still in my pocket as I approached him. He looked a little unsure of me. I made a big show of being very friendly with him. I contemplated telling the old guy that the van was following me and to call the police when he got to a phone, but I decided not to. When we finally got within a few feet of each other, we struck up a conversation. As I started commenting on how it was a great day for a walk, I heard the minivan move again. It crept past us back onto the main road and drove away. The old man half turned to watch it.
Maybe just gonna
After it was
rob you.
gone, he made mention that the guy was just sitting there staring at me. I laughed a bit and told him that was why I was behind the tree. After the old man went on his way, I milled around that part of the sidewalk for about 5 minutes, trying to figure out what the guy in the minivan wanted and why he had
That
chosen
booty.
that for a license plate. I happened to look back towards the park, and just beyond that was my car. I had parked just off the main intersection because the park was right there. I thought about turning around and heading back, calling it quits and moving on from the strange ordeal, and that's when I saw him. The red Windstar was turning on to the main east-west street and was heading my way again. I took out my knife and quickly flipped open the blade and started picking out my thumbnail with it. He missed the turn to get back onto the side road, but he slowed way down as he passed. He stared straight at me the entire time, and this time I made sure he saw that I had a knife in my hand.
Jesus.
Once he passed by,
He's picking.
he accelerated and vanished in the same direction that he had gone the first time. I was pretty confident that he would make a third pass, and if I was still in the open and alone, he would come back and we would have another weird standoff. Whatever he was up to, this time I wasn't going to be in the open for him. If he really wanted me, he would have to come looking. I walked further down by the beach. There was a lot of tree cover there. There were a few cubbies for people to sit in and watch the beach. So I camped out in one and waited for the van. I figured that he wasn't coming back after about a half hour, and at this point,
Yeah, you
I
waited
just
a
wanted to
half
go
hour?
home. I walked back the way I had come from, keeping a watchful eye out for Mr. Skinner, who I'm glad to say never did make his return. To this day, I have no idea what the guy wanted. His plates were Wisconsin plates, but I had never seen that van before, and I asked around town, and no one else could recall a van of that same make and model with that particular license plate. I still think about it from time to time. I often wonder what would have happened if he had gotten out of his van. I always envisioned that he had a syringe or something, and that he would have stuck it into my arm and knocked me out, and from there, I don't know. Thinking about this incident is always followed by the hope that he hasn't done this to someone else. After all, Wisconsin is the state that gave us Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm just thankful that old man walked up when he did, so I didn't have to find out what Mr. Skinner's
Really?
real motives were.
Are they from Wisconsin?
This took place in my hometown of Weymouth when I was 14. my friends and I decided to go exploring in an abandoned building that was next to some railroad tracks. We figured that we could sneak in through a loading bay that faced the tracks. Our plan was to sneak out at 11 p.m., get there by 11:30, and try and be back at our houses by 1. I will admit that I was scared in the days leading up to it. It was basically unheard of in my town for anyone to do anything remotely risky. But we were young and reckless. We wanted excitement and adventure. The night came, and Tim and Charlie were supposed to meet me by a streetlight near a cafe. And then we would find the tracks and follow them for about a quarter mile until we got to the loading bay. I grabbed a couple of flashlights and headed out my door when my family finally fell asleep. As I was walking down to the cafe, I heard footsteps approaching quickly from behind me. When I turned around, no one was there. I ignored it, thinking that my mind was playing tricks on me. After about 5 minutes, it happened again. Again, I turned around, and there was nothing. I finally got to the cafe where we were supposed to meet. My friends Tim and Charlie were already there, so we proceeded with our plan. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I wasn't about to let my friends know that I was scared. We finally reached the abandoned building. One of the old rusty bay doors was jammed open, just enough for us to slide under it. We entered the building and turned on our flashlights. There was graffiti everywhere. It was obvious that we weren't the only ones that came in here looking for thrills. There was one piece of graffiti that caught my eye. It was a metallic paint that stood out from the rest. It read, "Don't come back." "Hey guys, come check this out," I called out to my friends. I was answered by manic footsteps pounding behind me. I turned, and I saw a tall, skinny man with greasy, wiry hair. He wore horribly ripped clothes. His eyes were wide open, with a huge ear-to-ear smile. I was frozen to the spot, utterly paralyzed by fear. He threw his head back and cackled, and I just stood there in complete horror and shock until my friends started screaming at me to run. That brought me back to reality, and I booked it.
As
I was approaching the bay door, I still heard the man's footsteps behind me. They were getting louder, and he was closing in. I slid through the door like a baseball player, and as soon as I scrambled to my feet, we made a break for it. But the thing that stuck with me, even to this day, the thing that still chills me to the bone, was the voice that boomed out from the building.
"Don't come back."
That only made us run faster. "What the hell was that?" Tim panted as we ran. "I don't know," I said. Charlie was so shaken up that he did not say a single word. When we got back to the cafe, we decided that we would all go back to our houses. But there was one thought that kept me up for the rest of the night. One thought that still haunts me to this day. How long had he been following me that night?
All night. So I'm gonna talk about that last one. Like it might have been, I don't know, some supernatural shit or something like that. But they would then don't come back, or him holding his head back and laughing like the Joker or some shit. Like, I don't know. It seemed like it was supposed to be like you could take it as like supernatural. So I guess it probably is a homeless person. And with a mental illness just in there, and they just lash out. But that second story, he said, "I'm a fat guy." And like, why would anybody want me? When I was in Kandahar, Afghanistan, when I got there, I worked at the airport. I like brief people when they come in, different rules, base, and process and stuff like that. Found out who was just passing through, like they call them transients, and like going to another base, or who was gonna be stationed there, stuff like that. And then I called Like if they were Army, I could call the Army side and say, hey, you got 30 people here. Marines, like, hey, you got so many people here, and, so on and so forth. Navy, whatever. Whichever was like, why is the Navy here when they don't just be on boats, And I remember one of the things they told me to brief on was there was a lot of gang rapes on the base, and particularly they didn't know who, but it was at night because there was a lot of spots on the base at night that were just pitch black. There were no lights. Like especially like the Army side, they had like a few lights over there, but a lot of that and like they had a few lights where in that kind of where the parking lot was at. It was just really just dirt, but it was like a parking lot. But where they built was at, they had light on the end of each basically like corridor, but no lights in between. So it looked like almost like pitch black. It's like right in the middle of the building, except on the ends of the building. And I remember, which was funny, which was weird, that this was happening actually closer to what they call the boardwalk, where it had a lot of like restaurants and like stores and stuff. People would buy cheap stuff like that, knockoff stuff. And basically, it was like people being gang raped, and it was just men. And the thing when I got this, I remember they said 2 Marines had been gang raped or something like that, and I was just like, what? Like we own base. I mean, it's people all this deal. It's you got Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, all different. Like you had Australian forces there. They even had like some Samoan forces there. I seen them when they did like they did chant. I actually seen them do that there. It was like Canadians, because we were right next to Canadian. We were actually right across the street. They had a Tim Hortons there, which is right next to the Canadian like compound, and we were in Air Force compound was right across the street from them. And then you had the United, like basically like United Nations type compound. They had the best apartments. They were basically an apartment. Ours was like a pod. You could just like a movie, you pick it up and put it on back of a truck and just move it. This was like actually built brick buildings there. But I think they were JPEG or something. I can't remember. But yeah, that was the thing. It was like people being gangers, so I had to brief people on this. Like, hey, go out. When you go out, don't go in dark places by yourself. Go stay in well-lit places. How you're at nighttime. It was regulation that you had to have a reflective bulb, which is something that at the time I didn't know that was actually a rule even on bases in the U.S. Like you're supposed to have a reflective bulb on when you're in the military, which I did not know. I saw Army people doing that. They'd be out at night, like walking around or because in Oklahoma, like part of that base, they saw the Navy. It's an Air Force base, but Navy is stationed there too, and they all on one particular side of the base. So like we said, that's the Navy side, and you would see them sometimes. They be out running or something. They were like reflective belt on and stuff like that, and nobody ever enforced that on the base we were at. So I didn't know that in the regulation when I looked up that was actually like you're supposed to do that. Period. Like you're supposed to have like a reflective belt on at night, not just like when you deploy in a war zone. But I had to brief people, and I thought that was so weird. Like I had to tell people, yeah, you're on this base, and don't go into it by yourself at night, or in dark places at night, and wear your reflective because people are being gang raped, and it was only men. That I didn't see a single report, at least while I was there, of a woman being raped. It was just men. and they were being gang raped. So I was like, what the fuck? Like, I was like, this shit is crazy. Like, you worrying about, you seeing rockets being launched at the base. They would do raids on the base, like I guess the Taliban or whatever. Or they would. I remember I was talking to the people there from Austria, the Austrian soldiers, and one spoke actually really good English when I was talking to him. He said they ride towards the base on camelback, and they said they just shoot them down because they was like outside in tanks and stuff. And he's like, we just shoot them, like you just shoot them down. I was like, well, I said, why would you ride on and camelback and you see his tanks like out there? Like, well, that's interesting, but well, you would hear those rocket goes off, and I said, you deal with all this shit coming from outside the base. Now you own the base, and you had to deal with rape. I take that, but I did hear something. Some civilians were talking about a civilian woman was raped, but that was with other civilians. It wasn't like military rape. Because the Air Force, we weren't even allowed to be actually in each other's room, like men and women. We were not allowed to be in each other. I walked past the female like barracks once because there was a exit right there, so I had parked the car. I had to come in that way, and I had a master sergeant. I think it was might have been a woman. I don't know. It was hard to tell, but it came running like across the thing. Like, what are you doing over here? And I was like, whoa. I was like, I just parked and had to come walk by this. And I guess they thought I was coming out of somebody's room or something. Oh, you're not supposed to be over here. I'm like, calm down. It's broad daylight. It's like, because I think I was on lunch, so it had to be noon. And I was like, hey, you lost your mind. They were like, what are you doing over here? You're not supposed to be over here. I remember I told my chief about it, and he was like, okay. He said, that was an overreaction. He said, what you think you're doing? You're over there sleep with somebody at noon? Broad daylight. People did it. Like, people did it, but they did it at night. Under cover of darkness, not broad daylight, where people are moving around and stuff. And it's like, what the fuck? Yeah, people feel like the army did. I think they had something where they're not supposed to. If the females and males are in each other's room, they're supposed to keep their door open. And they were like, I remember I talked to some army guys, like, we don't do this shit. They said, we close our door, we don't care. I think Marines had something like that too, where they're supposed to keep their door open. And they didn't care. And I think it was the people who was like part of the JPEG, they didn't even, they had men and women in the same building. So, because I remember I walked in one with this Marine guy that he worked across the hall from me. And we went to go get something to eat and stuff. We went to the store. And he said, hey man, you take me back to my room. I need to get some. I was like, so I went up in there. And I saw girls walking down and like booty shorts and stuff. I was like, the fuck? Like, cause we don't, like I said, our men and women in the Air Force compound are completely separated. So I was like, what the fuck? He's like, oh yeah. He's like, we have men and women in the same building. They're just not roommates. Because only men can be roommates with men and women. Roommates with women. I was like, that is, to me, that was crazy. I was like, I was just so stuck. Like they allowed that. But, which is nothing really weird, because when I was in tech school, we had men and women in the same building. We didn't have men and women on the same corridor. So like a whole hallway, each room, that was like, this is the guy. And then we had one over here, like, this is the girls. Here, this is the guy. And then Um, I think the second floor had like this the guys, this the girls. This the, I think the entire top floor was for women. I want to say, yeah. But anyway, getting off on push. Hope you all enjoyed my reaction. If you did, make sure you hit that thumbs up button down below. Make sure to hit that bell if you want to be notified when I upload a video. Make sure to subscribe if you're new here. Comment down below. Share this video on your various different social media platforms. And I'll see y'all next week. Peace.